Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going to be exploring something that I think is super relatable, this idea of Bevy. Like a big old group of something, and what those groups mean to us as individuals. Now, you, our listener, you've sent in some seriously fascinating thoughts on how different groups have really shaped your own life. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting on something universal here, whether we're talking family, a sports team, or even just those folks you see every day at the gym. Groups have this way of influencing all of us.
Oh, I love that you mentioned the gym because in what you sent us, you talked about feeling this sense of belonging there, even though you don't necessarily have like close friendships with everyone there. You even described the gym as having this chill and open-minded kind of vibe. What is it about that specific atmosphere that appeals to you?
Well, I think for a lot of folks, there's a real comfort in knowing there are shared values.
Yeah.
You know, like everyone's kind of on the same wavelength, working towards similar goals without someone constantly looking over your shoulder. And it's interesting because you also mentioned feeling more at ease in smaller groups and not feeling this pressure to be entertaining 24/7.
Oh, that's so true. It's funny because it makes me wonder if maybe there's a connection between that, between preferring those kind of low-key groups and maybe, just maybe, being a little bit more on the introverted side. What's really fascinating to me is that you mentioned you don't always think of yourself as an introvert, but at the same time, you really thrive in those calmer settings.
Yeah. It's not always so cut and dry. Plenty of people relate to both. A little bit of introversion, a little bit of extroversion. But I think what we're really getting at here, what's at the heart of it, is that feeling of just being accepted for who you are. No pressure to be on all the time, which for introverts can be incredibly draining. I mean, who wants to be on all the time? Those quieter environments, though, they give folks a chance to recharge, to focus on making genuine connections without feeling like they got to perform.
Totally. It's like you're saving up your energy for those connections that really matter, the ones you want to invest in.
Mhm.
Speaking of, you also talked about this group back in high school. You called them outcasts, though you yourself didn't necessarily see them that way, right? And it sounds like they had a big impact on you, on how you see yourself even.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a textbook example of what we call social identity theory. Basically, the groups we identify with, they actually become part of our own self-image. And in your case, aligning with a group that was seen as different or outside the mainstream, it probably created this intense sense of solidarity and probably gave you the space to figure out who you were without feeling like you had to fit some mold.
And you even said you didn't have to try hard to be someone else around them, which, man, that is powerful. The idea of just finding your people, the place where you can just be you. So do you think that's like essential? Finding those groups where you don't have to put up a front for building a strong sense of self?
Oh, 100%.
Mm.
I mean, imagine if you had to constantly pretend to be someone you're not to fit in. It'd be exhausting. And frankly, it keeps you from making real, authentic connections. These early experiences, like the one you had in high school, they really lay the groundwork for how we approach groups, how we approach relationships even later in life.
So maybe those experiences way back when, they kind of helped you figure out what you really value in a group, right? That genuine acceptance, the freedom to just be yourself. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit. Talk about crowds. You mentioned having this, I don't know, kind of a complex relationship with them. Like, on the one hand, you get nervous, which makes sense from an introvert's perspective, right? But you also mentioned that you enjoy just, like, watching them.
Yeah, it's interesting because for you, it seems to be less about the crowd itself and more about how much you got to, like, directly interact with it. Smaller groups where you can actually jump into the conversation, those are your jam. But you still get something out of observing the bigger ones. Almost like you're, I don't know, studying how it all works from a safe distance.
That word studying is perfect
Yeah.
because you literally compared it to watching a TV show, right? Like you're forming your own opinions about the characters and how they interact. So is there something to that? Can observing from the sidelines actually be beneficial? Like, could it help us understand how groups work?
Oh, without a doubt. Observation is this amazing tool for learning social cues and norms, all those unspoken rules of how people behave. And you're doing it without the pressure of being in the spotlight. It's like you're taking it all in, processing it, and coming to your own conclusions. Like a real-life social experiment.
It is. It's like you're taking mental notes, analyzing every interaction, maybe even picking up strategies for how to handle different social situations. It's fascinating because even though you're not necessarily the loudest voice in the room, you're still engaging with the crowd, just on this whole other intellectual level.
Exactly. And that kind of engagement, it's just as valuable as being the life of the party.
Yeah.
It's all about finding the way that works for you, the way that lets you connect with the world around you in a way that feels, authentic.
Yeah.
It really is,
Yeah.
finding that way to connect. And it kind of brings us back to something you mentioned earlier, that gym community of yours. You talked about this sense of belonging, even without having like close personal relationships. So I'm curious, what makes it feel so different from, say, just being in a crowd?
Hmm. That's interesting because in a way it is a crowd, right? But there's this shared purpose. Everyone's there for the same reason. Everyone's focused on their own, individual effort. And there's just this unspoken respect for everyone's journey, I guess you could say. Like, yeah, we're all in this together, all pushing ourselves, but without the judgment or the competition you might find in other settings.
You pretty much nailed it. It's a perfect example of what we in the biz call a community of practice. Even if you're not, best buds with everyone, you've got this shared interest, these unspoken rules like gym etiquette, the commitment to that common goal, and all that together, it creates this really powerful sense of belonging.
And you even specifically mentioned how much you value that there aren't like pushy trainers or anything, just this overall atmosphere of respect. It seems like there's a careful balancing act there, right? Between being inclusive and making room for everyone, but also keeping those good vibes going. How do communities, especially bigger ones, how do they deal with that? Like what happens when someone's disruptive?
Well, it's a constant dance, that's for sure. A healthy community, though, it usually has these norms. Sometimes they're written down, sometimes they're just like in the air. And while being open to individual differences, that's essential, right? Sometimes you got to address those actions that throw things off, that disrupt the shared experience. It's about finding that way to uphold those values, the things that bind the community together.
Right. So it's more than just welcoming everyone with open arms. It's got to be an environment where everyone feels respected, supported, where they can actually focus on reaching their goals. Now, I want to shift gears a little and talk about another type of group that's, I think, really central to all of our lives, friendships. You described yourself as someone who's, quote, not very expressive, but someone who deeply values those friendships, even saying you might internalize friendship more strongly than you show outwardly. So can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. It sounds like you have a more introspective approach to friendship, which is totally fine. There's no one size fits all, Not everyone's going to be shouting their feelings in the rooftops, and that's okay. For some folks, it's all about actions speaking louder than words. For others, it's about those deep, unspoken bonds.
That's a really good point. It's not about trying to match someone else's idea of what friendship should look like. It's about figuring out what feels authentic to you. You also mentioned, though, this worry that because you're more reserved, people might see you as cold. Is that a common fear for folks who express friendship differently?
Oh, yeah, definitely. When what's going on inside doesn't quite match how we show it on the outside, it can lead to, misunderstandings. But it's crucial to remember there's no right way to be a friend. What truly matters is that the connection is real.
And you captured that beautifully when you said, and I'm quoting you here, ultimately speaking, when it really matters, I'll be there.
Mhm.
That line really resonated with me because it speaks volumes about your commitment to those friendships,
Yeah.
even if you're not always, outwardly showing it.
That's it. It's about being the kind of friend who shows up,
Mm-hmm.
who offers support, like actually does something, who's in it for the long haul. That loyalty, that care, it comes through in what you do, even if you're not someone who's, constantly gushing.
It's powerful stuff, being that steady presence, the one your friends can always count on. Now, you also touched on something I found really interesting, this idea of maintaining a fallback position, even within your friendships, a
Right.
place where you can rely on yourself no matter what. Could you expand on that a bit? Is it about protecting yourself or maybe holding on to that sense of independence?
It seems to be a bit of both, really. It's about finding that balance between wanting to be close to others and, needing to be self-sufficient. Knowing
Yeah.
you can handle things on your own, even when you've got those strong friendships.
So not pushing people away or saying, I don't need help, but having that inner strength, that resilience to face challenges solo if you have to.
It's fascinating because you mentioned this fallback instinct ticking in 3 times in your life already. And while, of course, we respect your privacy, it's clear those experiences really shape this perspective. Do you think those moments when you had to rely on yourself made you even better at connecting with others?
It's definitely possible. Sometimes going through tough stuff alone, it builds this resilience inside you. You realize you can handle anything. And that inner strength, it can actually make you more open to connecting because you're not coming at it from a place of, I don't know, neediness or insecurity.
Makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
those challenges, they help you build this confidence, this self-assurance.
Yeah.
And that allows you to connect with others in a way that's more whole. Like you're not looking to them to complete you or validate you.
Exactly. Healthy relationships, they're about both sides, right?
Right.
Giving and receiving support,
Hmm.
but also being able to stand on your own 2 feet. Finding that sweet spot, the balance between leaning on others and trusting in yourself. You mentioned earlier a concern that this desire for a fallback position, it might create distance in your friendships. Is that a valid worry?
It could be. If it's not something you're, aware of, like if you're constantly guarding yourself, holding back from really letting people in, it can build a wall.
Yeah.
And that's going to make it tough to build real intimacy.
So back to that balance again, right? Having a healthy sense of self-reliance, but not letting it block you from making those connections.
Absolutely. We're stronger together, right?
Yeah.
But knowing your own strength, that's a huge asset too.
It is. It's knowing you've got your own back, even while you're building that trust and intimacy with others. You also said something about, and I'm quoting again here, subconsciously wanting an absolute safe zone no matter what. What do you think is behind that? Is it just human nature to want that security? Especially in a world that feels, well, pretty unpredictable.
Oh, it's a basic need. We all
Yeah.
crave security, that feeling of being safe and stable,
Mm.
especially when everything else feels, crazy.
So wanting that safe zone, that feeling of being grounded, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all. It's about recognizing that need and then figuring out healthy ways to meet it. Maybe it's through your relationships. Maybe it's spending time in nature. Maybe it's a spiritual practice. Heck, maybe it's just making your home a really comfy, cozy space.
Finding those things that anchor you, keep you steady when everything else is swirling around you. Now, we've talked a lot about how the groups we're part of, they kind of shape who we are. But you also brought up something I hadn't really thought about, that maybe I don't know, the meaning or the value of those groups, especially friend groups, maybe those change as we get older. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Think about it like this. What matters to you, what you need, it changes throughout your life, right? The friends who are like your whole world in high school, they might not play the same role in college or later when you're working and maybe even starting a family. It's not that the friendships themselves become less important. It's more that, how they fit into your life shifts.
So we have to be okay with that, with friendships evolving, with them kind of adapting to the different phases of our lives.
Right. Letting go of the expectation that things will always stay the same. Some friendships fade, some become even closer. It's all part of life.
Going with the flow, letting things change. Now, you also mentioned something I found really interesting, that you might think of your friends more than they think of you. Is that a common thing, that asymmetry in how we see our relationships?
More common than you'd think. We all have these stories in our heads about our relationships, right?
Yeah.
But those stories don't always match up with what the other person's thinking.
So we have to remember that our view of a relationship, it might not be the exact same as the other person's.
Exactly. There's always going to be some subjectivity, right? That's part of what makes human connection so complex and so interesting.
It's about accepting that we can't control how other people see us or
Yeah.
how they feel about our relationship, but we can focus on being the best friend we can be, regardless of whether or not we feel it's perfectly reciprocated.
It really is about focusing on what we can control, our own actions, our own intentions.
Being the best version of ourselves in those relationships and hoping that, in turn, that inspires the best in others as well. Now, you mentioned earlier a concern that your more internalized approach to friendship might be, quote, doing it wrong. But you also emphasized that, and again, I'm quoting, ultimately speaking, when it really matters, I'll be there. Does that suggest that maybe actions speak louder than words, especially in friendships?
Well, absolutely. For a lot of people, actions are the most genuine way to show they care. It's about showing up for the people you love, being present in their lives, and offering tangible support, even if you're not someone who, wears their heart on their sleeve.
It's about being the kind of friend who's there when it counts, who offers a steady hand and a listening ear, even if it's done quietly and without a lot of fanfare.
Precisely. And it highlights there are different ways to express friendship. What one person might see as a lack of affection, another might experience as a deeply felt connection.
It's about understanding and appreciating those individual differences in how we give and receive love and support within friendships.
Exactly. There's no one right way to experience friendship, to show it, to feel it. Some people are naturally more outward with their feelings, while others might express their care through actions or simply by being present. What matters most is that the feeling is genuine.
So it's not about trying to fit ourselves into a mold, but rather finding those ways to communicate our care in a way that feels authentic to us, however that looks.
Absolutely. Let go of the pressure to perform friendship in a certain way and just focus on being there, being supportive in whatever way feels most genuine.
It's about recognizing that real connection. It comes from that place of authenticity, not from trying to force ourselves into someone else's idea of what friendship should be.
Exactly. Embrace the uniqueness of your relationships, all those little quirks and nuances. Celebrate the fact that connection can take so many different forms.
That is beautiful. Recognizing that what makes friendship beautiful is the fact that there's no one way to do it. It's all about those individual ways we connect and care for each other. We've talked a lot about your own experiences with groups and friendships, but you also mentioned how groups, like in society as a whole, can shape who we are. Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. I mean, think about it. From the moment we're born, we're placed in groups, family,
Yeah.
culture, nationality, you name it. These groups, they give us this framework for understanding the world,
Mm.
our place in it, even our own values and beliefs.
So it's almost like a preset map for navigating life. But you also raised this question whether belonging to these groups, whether that can be, I don't know, limiting or maybe liberating, how can it be both?
Ah, the paradox, right? On one hand, belonging, it can give us this sense of security, identity, a feeling like we have a purpose, like we're connected to something bigger. But if we let those groups define us too rigidly, that can be a problem. It can stifle our growth, make us afraid to be different, even make us accept stuff that's, harmful, norms or biases that we wouldn't buy into on our own.
So it's about finding that balance again, embracing the good parts of belonging, but not letting it be the only thing that defines who we are.
Exactly. Be aware of how those groups influence you, the good and the bad. Make conscious choices about which ones you align yourself with and how much you let them shape you.
It's about owning your identity, recognizing those influences, but then deciding for yourself who you want to be.
You got it. Identity isn't static, it's dynamic. It changes as we learn, grow, and connect with the world.
We're always in the state of becoming, shaping and reshaping ourselves through everything we experience, every interaction. Man, we've covered so much ground today. Groups, communities, friendships. It's been a whirlwind. So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you'd want our listener to walk away with?
The most important takeaway, connection. It's a basic human need, but there's no, instruction manual. There are so many ways to belong, to connect, to experience those rich relationships.
So it's about accepting that there's no right way to do connection.
Exactly. Let go of those rigid expectations. Embrace the fact that relationships are fluid, they're
Yeah.
complex, and let them change and adapt as you go through life.
Recognizing that what makes connection beautiful is that we all experience it differently.
You nailed it. Celebrate those differences, honor your own needs and boundaries, and approach relationships with an open heart. Be willing to embrace the messiness and the beauty of human connection.
That is a perfect way to put it, embracing the messiness and the beauty. Now, before we say goodbye, is there one last question, something really thought-provoking that you'd like to leave our listener with? Something to think about as they navigate their own bevy of belonging, as we've been calling it.
As you continue to explore those groups and relationships, ask yourself this: how can you balance that need for self-reliance with the potential for deeper connection within those groups?
Wow, that's a great one. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can be both independent and interdependent, where we can lean on others but also stand strong on our own.
True strength. It doesn't come from isolating yourself. It comes from the ability to do both, to stand alone when you have to, but also reach out and connect when you need to.
It's about finding that balance, that push and pull that allows us to thrive both as individuals and as part of something bigger than ourselves. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the bevy of belonging. It's been an amazing journey, honestly. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights with us. They've added so much to this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. These universal themes, seeing how they play out in people's lives, it's always fascinating.
And to our listener out there, as you navigate your own bevy of belonging, we hope this has given you some food for thought, maybe even a few aha moments along the way.
Remember, this journey of understanding yourself, understanding your relationships, it's never really over. Embrace the complexity, the nuances, and the fact that connection is always changing.
There's always more to discover about ourselves, about the people around us. So keep exploring, keep reflecting, and until next time, happy deep diving.
It's funny, thinking back to those different languages of friendship, like we were talking about, it made me remember something you said way back at the beginning
Hmm.
about how maybe because you're so reserved, you might be, quote, doing friendship wrong.
Mm.
But then, you followed that up with, when it really matters, I'll be there.
Hmm.
And it really stuck with me. It's like it gets to the heart of how we really show up for the people we care about.
It does, doesn't it? It kind of throws out the window this idea that there's only one right way to be a good friend. For some folks, yeah, actions speak louder than words. It's not about the grand gestures, it's about just being there, showing up in those everyday moments, being present, offering support, even if you're not, constantly expressing it verbally. Being that rock, the friend who's always there no matter what, offering a hand, listening without judgment, quietly, consistently. And you know what? I think this ties back to what we were discussing about self-reliance, too. It's like those times you had to rely on yourself, those fallback moments. They might have actually made you even more empathetic, more understanding of what others go through.
That's a really cool connection. Having gone through tough stuff yourself, you can come at those friendships with more compassion.
Yeah.
You get it. Everyone's got their own struggles. And that lets you offer support from a place of, like, I've been there, not you're doing it
So
wrong.
you've walked through fire and come out the other side with this deeper understanding of what it means to be human, to struggle, to make it through. And that lets you connect with people on a whole other level.
Totally. And it brings us back to that question we've been kind of circling around this whole time. How do we balance needing to be self-reliant with wanting those deep connections? You
Yeah.
seem to have found that sweet spot,
Ah.
honoring both sides of yourself.
It's definitely an ongoing process. But what I find so inspiring about your story is that it shows us those two things that need to be independent and that longing for connection. They're not mutually exclusive. They can coexist, maybe even like enhance each other.
I think so. And that's such an important message. It's okay to want both those things, to need your space, but also crave closeness. In fact, embracing both those sides, that might be the key to a really fulfilling life.
Well said. Man, we have covered a lot today. It's been amazing. But before we say goodbye, is there one last question, something to really get our listeners thinking that you want to leave them with? Something to ponder as they go about, building their own bevy of belonging, as we've been calling it.
Here's something to chew on. As you're exploring those groups, those relationships, ask yourself, what makes you, why you, in those connections? What gifts do you bring? How can you use your strengths, your experiences, your own unique way of showing up to create a more meaningful sense of belonging? Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you.
That's a beautiful thought. It's like we're not just looking for where we fit in, we're actively shaping those connections, bringing our own something special to the table, adding our own color to the tapestry.
That's it. And remember, figuring out who you are, where you belong, it's a journey, not a destination. Embrace all the twists and turns, celebrate those differences, and just keep exploring those spaces where you feel that click, that sense of truly belonging.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the bevy of belonging. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's been such a rich and insightful conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. Always love a good deep dive.
And to our listener, we hope this episode has given you some new ways of looking at belonging, some new ideas to play with, maybe even a few aha moments along the way.
Keep those wheels turning. Keep connecting. And until next time, happy deep diving.
See you next time, deep divers.